So let's start writing some code in this section. We'll start with the Hello World API, but before that, let's cover what we are going to learn in this section. We'll be covering the mechanism of a HTTP web server. We'll also cover the handler functions and the request multiplexer. We'll play around with request and response headers, and we'll see how we can marshal the data structures to XML and JSON representations. But first, let's start with the HTTP web server. So at the heart of a HTTP server lies a multiplexer. So multiplexer is responsible for matching all the registered routes, and then it passes the control to their appropriate handler functions. Once the request comes to the HTTP server, it is taken care by the multiplexer. So the multiplexer matches those patterns and then it forwards the request to their appropriate routes. So in this example, we have greet and customer as our endpoint for the resource, and they are also called patterns. Let's go to IntelliJ and create a new project, a new Go project, and I want to name it banking. Here we will create a new Go file, the main file, and we'll rename the package to main and introduce our main function here. So we will use the standard HTTP library and we will not rely on any external framework or library. HTTP package provides a default request multiplexer, and we will use this in this example. We just need two functions, one for registering our routes and second for starting the server. The first function is handle function, and this function takes two parameters. First is the pattern, which is the route, the endpoint, and we say greet to this, and second is the handler function. So just write func here and it will generate the body for the handler function. So the first parameter is the response writer. So response writer is the one who is going to help us in sending the response back to the client. So whatever we are writing to the response writer will be going back to the client. Let's rename it to W here. And second parameter is the request. So the request is the one coming to the server, the URL, the parameters attached to the URL, the body which is attached to that request. All of that information will come in the request object. So let's rename it to R. We will use the FMT library's fprint function to send the response back to the client. So this function takes two parameters. One is an IO writer and second is the data which we want to send to the IO writer. So the response writer is also a type of IO writer. So we can safely say W to it and say hello world here. So once we write hello world here, so FMT function takes this hello world and it writes the hello world to the writer here, which is W. In our case, it is the response writer. So that means this response will be going back to the client. Let's see what is happening here. We call this handle function and we pass two parameters to it. First is the greet and second is the handler function, and they get registered with the default request multiplexer. If we go inside the handle function here, we will see the default servmux, and this default servmux is the default request multiplexer. So whatever pattern and handler function we are passing, they get registered with the default multiplexer here. So this is the first function. The second function is the listen and serve. So the listen serve starts the server. We need to provide where do we want to start the server, on which IP and what port of my machine I want to start the server. So here I say I want to start my server on localhost 8000 port, and second parameter is the handler. So handler is the request multiplexer, and since we are not creating our own request multiplexer, we are relying on the default one, so we can safely pass nil here. So this is good. Let's run this example. We'll go inside the banking folder and then say go run main.go. So here we see my server is running and it is ready for accepting requests. So let's open another terminal and use the curl command to send a request to my server, which is running on localhost 8000 port, and endpoint is greet. We see we have received hello world, which is the message which we are sending from the server. By doing this, we know that my server is set up correctly. It is accepting the request and it is also responding in the proper way. So let's revisit what we have done here. So here we are registering our pattern and the handler function with the default multiplexer, and in the next line we are starting the server. So let's make it a little bit more readable. So the people who are new to the Golang, they find this kind of a syntax where we are passing a function to a function. They find it a little ugly and unreadable. People who are coming from functional programming background, JavaScript background, this is a very natural thing for them and they don't face any issues. And we can just pull out this function, and I can name this function as greet, put it outside here and name this as greet. We are now passing a reference to this function. So greet, we are not invoking the function here, but we are just passing the reference to the greet function. And the name of the function also acts like a variable name, so you can just pass it here. So now this is more readable. The function is out of the main function, and we can say here we are defining all our routes. At the moment there is only one, and here we are starting. So one more thing, listen and serve returns an error, and we should wrap this with log.fatal. So we'll be aware if there is an error while starting the server. In the next video, we will play around with JSON marshalling using structs, and that is what we'll be sending in the response. So see you in our next video.